Welcome to Roma to Sonoma, where we explore the rich history and vibrant culture of two iconic wine regions, Italy and California. I'm a wine journalist from Sonoma.
And I'm Pia. I'm a sommelier based here in Rome. And today we are going to explore the truth behind some of the biggest misconceptions about wine. And we're going to start with a big one, which is expensive wine is always better. And this is obviously something that being based in Italy, I know a little bit about because, you can get kind of €1,000 Barolos and you can also get sort of, €2 wine at the supermarket. And what is your take on this, Lane?
Well, I think that, the price of wine is influenced by so many different things. Obviously the way that you farm, the production, the branding and exclusivity, all of those things really, play a role. But I think one of the biggest things is that people don't think about so much is the real estate costs, the land costs. And as a good example of that, being in California, whenever I'm traveling, one comment I hear all the time, people are always making comments about how ridiculous the wine prices are in California, which of course I completely agree. For the most part, it's not all
Yeah.
like that, but Napa Valley for sure. And I've asked around when I get back, why is it so different here? And the one thing that they say is the land costs. And it's because Napa Valley in particular is not very big. It's actually quite small. And so whatever land is there increases in value, exponentially. A lot of people start making wine in other places around Napa just because they can't afford to buy land there, if it's even becomes available. So that's a huge part of it. And also, I think that comparatively to European wineries, for not all the time, but oftentimes you have kind of generational businesses where they've not had to
Yeah.
purchase that land to start business or even facilities to start a business. So that plays a big role too. And I think that's why you can get some really incredible wines in Europe that are so much less expensive than they are here in California in particular. So I think that, for just generally speaking, just being expensive doesn't mean that's, a better quality than something that you can get less expensive in France or Italy or even in the US. It is an indicator of some of the costs that have gone into that product and how, obviously how many the market is interested in spending to receive it. So usually that's because it has some kind of a reputation. But as far as quality goes, you can get excellent wines for, I'm going to just grossly generate here to, 60 and under. But you do have to know a little bit about wine to find those. And if it's above 60, I think you can sort of, probably just kind of assume that there are a lot of things that have gone into that cost, whether it's a star winemaker or whatever it is, there are going to be costs that probably raise that price. Does that mean that the actual wine itself is better? Not always.
Mhm. No, I think that's an excellent point. I feel like you kind of have an equivalent here in Europe as well. So, for example, I'm thinking, Burgundy. You think of Domaine de la Romanée Conti, like the Grand Cru, they go for, hundreds of thousands. But it's because of prestige and rarity. But that's clearly, not the case for a lot of the other wines in Burgundy. The Burgundy wines, I think of Chablis, I think of lots of others, are very expensive. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're excellent wines.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot to be said about undervalued regions as well. What do you
Yes.
think?
Absolutely. I think a perfect example that, I love, I know you do too, is Mount Etna in Sicily and actually across Sicily. I think there's some really amazing wines. Mount Etna is a great example though, because those wines are just, kind of like a wine lover's dream.
Yeah.
And it's just that's just a great example of where terroir makes a huge difference. And, again, oftentimes family owned properties, and really that's very exclusive though. I mean, obviously Mount Etna, you can't put, the big mass production up there. So it is still pretty, exclusive, but the prices are very reasonable. And I think that's really kind of all of Italy, except maybe in like maybe more northern areas, well, Tuscany too, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think, obviously you have your super Tuscans that go for pretty high prices, everything that you've got in your Barolo, your Brunellos, your Sassicaia. I mean, all of these kind of things go for very high prices, but on the whole, it's nothing compared to the pricing in France, and certainly nothing compared to California. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Exactly. Well,
So
and
a good
so the
tip,
next,
sorry.
excuse me, what did you say?
No, I was going to say, so I feel like a good tip for
Oh, yes.
anyone is lesser known regions or emerging winemakers for exceptional value. I feel like those are two things that if you can kind of find that nexus,
I
you're
agree.
you can do
Good
well.
point. That's a very, very good point. Yeah. And so the next myth is white wine with fish, red wine with meat. Pia is the expert. She is, and you really are. She's always doing the pairings when we're going out to dinner because she's so good at doing this. So Pia, what are your words of wisdom here?
Wow, thank you, Lane. I'm incredibly flattered. I'm not sure I deserve any of that, but no, I think it's an interesting one, right? Because I feel like this idea has emerged, and it's not without foundation. So I feel like there are red wines because of their tannins that are kind of that have that effect of astringency, are often paired with meats that have been, on the grill, very red meats, or meats with sauces, like you have that pairing that's quite often guiding people. And I don't think, again, I really don't think it's without foundation. But if, for example, you have like a white wine that you want to pair with something like white meats, so chicken, I'm thinking, for example, like a Greco di Tufo, which is an Italian white from Campania. It's excellent, or Carpaccio. You can pair it really nicely with like a Pinot Grigio. And I think one of the best examples is actually, in Italy, you eat a lot of cured meats as part of your antipasto. So you'll have, sausage and mortadella and that kind of thing. And they pair really well with sparkling wines because the acidity of the sparkling wine kind of cleans the palate from the fat of the meat. And it's really, really delicious. And so, for example, in Emilia Romagna, it's really common that you have, for example, mortadella with Lambrusco of all things, but again, just very nice pairings. And then, when you've got like a slightly sort of more meaty type, let's say, fish, so I'm thinking swordfish, then you could very happily kind of pair it with something like a Pinot Noir, which would be a really nice pairing. So I think, you've always got to be a little bit creative with these things. I certainly don't think it needs to be that much of a dogma. So yeah, just a few tips.
What about something like a tuna or salmon, kind of things that are in between
Yeah,
items?
so I'm thinking like tuna, for example, could go really nicely with like a gamay. So they're just these lighter kind of bodied reds. I mean, of all of the ones I'm thinking of, actually, what's your favorite
Pinot Noir.
Sicilian?
Oh, Sicilian. A frappato.
Frappato, yeah, exactly. Frappato, an excellent an excellent wine to pair with, for example, tuna
Yeah.
or swordfish, something like that. So yeah, I think it's all about kind of matching the wine structure with what it is that you're eating. Like that's where the kind of the balance lies.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I think that that's such a great tip is more you have fat that you're eating something with fat, the more you need like something acidic or with tannins to kind of like
Exactly.
balance it.
Yeah, exactly,
You don't
exactly.
want like a creamy wine, you don't want
No.
something like that. So the next myth then is screw caps or corks. Do we have any thoughts about this?
Very controversial. Yeah, I mean, Lane, you and I have discussed this at length. So old world tends to be more attached to corks, particularly Italy. It is still very hard to find screw caps here. And that, there's something about tradition, there's something about prestige, whereas, New World, if you're anywhere in New Zealand, Australia, and I think probably California, right? You're talking screw caps is predominant. Well, certainly in Australia and New Zealand, it's predominant.
It's not predominant here. It does
Okay.
exist, and it's maybe not seen as bad as it would be in, Italy. But I think the myth is that it's necessarily a less expensive wine. I don't think you're putting a screw cap on like a $300 bottle of wine. I don't think that's true, but I think that at least there are benefits to a screw cap and then there are benefits to a cork. So it's not like a bright line between
Yeah.
like that's a cheap wine and that's expensive wine. You can get cheap wines that have a cork, and you can get really nice wines that have a screw cap. Part of it
Yeah.
is, just basically sustainability because of the corks. The
Yeah.
corks are, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, and there's such a huge issue here with the I can't remember what the percentage of is of wines that are corked, but that's those wines have been shipped, they've been bottled. There's all of these things has an environmental impact on them, right? Whereas you don't have in the same way the same issue with screw caps. I mean, I guess the biggest issue is aging, right? Like it's you don't
Aging
get
is
the
a
benefit.
big issue.
Yeah.
I just thought of something else though. The corks, the cork comes from the tree, right? It's still
Yeah.
part of a tree. So I remember when I was in Puglia, this very sustainable, this winery that's very innovative with what they're doing for sustainability, are trying this cork that's like it's made from recycled materials. So you still
Hmm.
get the cork effect. So you could age it, because you could lay it horizontally and it would, but it's not a screw cap. I think that's a nice kind of balance right there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know anything about this one in particular because I mean, the whole issue with the cork is that micro oxygenation, right? Because that's what's then going to give you these tertiary aromas that you want in an aged wine. I just, to my knowledge, but again, I'm not an expert in this, and I know it's a very controversial topic, how much you can get that effect realistically with any alternative on your wine.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And then that takes it down. Then you do have a dividing line where it's kind of like, when do you plan to consume that wine? If you plan
Well,
to age it, do you need that oxidation?
yeah,
Oxidization.
I mean, no. I mean, I think it's a good point. But your average wine. I mean, not everyone. Most people don't have wines that they're aging in their wine fridge. Most
Yeah.
people are buying wines that they're drinking, and they're drinking. Most people drink white wines really young. And so if that's the case, do you really need a cork in there? I don't think so. I really don't.
No, and the
And
screw
I
cap seals perfectly. So then
Yeah.
that's the thing. If you're drinking it young, or maybe the second night or something, it really will keep that oxygen out so that it isn't going, reducing quickly,
Yeah, that's
or
absolutely
oxidizing.
true. And actually,
So
that brings us to the next one, which is
yeah.
older wine is always better. Oh, again, common misconception there.
Well, the first thing to know on this that is pretty important is that studies have shown that 98% of wine is consumed within 24 hours of purchasing, and
I did not
99%.
know that.
I know. And 99% in 48 hours. So the issue of aging, I do think that, maybe if you don't really know, should I age mine? What should I be aged? What should I be doing? It's not that common as it sounds. It's a very interesting phenomenon, aging, and what it does do to wines. But the most important thing is that wine has to have a certain kind of structure, has to have certain characteristics in order for it to even be a qualifier for aging. Because a wine that's not made like that is just going to go flat, essentially, if you try to like keep it for a year or two. It's not made for that. Some of them are just made to drink. But if you do have a bottle of wine that is made to age, and some wines are made to age, and this is an example, this could be some of these wines that are very, very, very expensive, but they're not really made for you to take it home and drink it. They're made for collectors, basically. So people who, have cellars, and they know that in 10, 20 years, that wine that today is going to be probably pretty tannic and high alcohol is going to mellow and become more complex and really come into what it can be with time.
Yeah.
Sometimes these collectors aren't buying it to ever drink, they're buying it as an asset.
Yeah,
So just
absolutely.
keep in mind that, the idea of aging isn't really necessary. And if you do have a wine that's, let's say, $100 bottle of wine, you might want to age that for a few years, or, maybe look at what the recommendations are, maybe up to 10 years. I have some wines here that are more than 10 years. It's not because I'm necessarily aging them. I just know that they're kind of made to age, but I almost don't even want to drink them now because they've been here so long. I'm like, am I going to be disappointed, or am I going to say, why did I open that?
I
So,
know it's kind of a gamble if you feel like then you've opened it too soon.
or it was just so amazing, but then you're like, oh, I should have saved it for this or something. I don't know. There becomes a lot of pressure. It becomes a lot of pressure. But yeah, no, not all wines are made to be aged. Most are not. And if you have a wine that is kind of like a qualifier for aging, I would say just age it for maybe a few years and see how it goes. If you can do it and buy a couple of bottles or a case, try it every few
Yeah.
years and see how it's
Yeah.
aging. If that's something interesting to you, that could be a fun experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think there's also something to be said about like wines. So I can give you kind of Italian examples, but like wines where there are certain grapes that really, man, if you drink them too early, those tannins, those, immature, like searing acidity and tannins of a Nebbiolo, for example, that is too young. I mean, I'm not going to say it's undrinkable, but you're almost there, And so
Yeah.
there are some wines, and there's a reason that, by the way, there's, within the what's it called, like in Italian called disciplinare, like within the legislation that you
Rules and
have to
yeah.
age them for a certain amount of time, simply because you know that's the minimum amount of time needed to be able to just soften those wines. We talked on a previous episode about Segretino, exactly that. It's not out of nothing that these certain amount of time in barrel or in bottle is developed. It's because it's what allows the tannins to kind of soften.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Taming the tannins.
Taming the tannins, exactly. And then white wines, right? So there are certain white wines like Riesling, Chenin Blanc that you can, age quite happily, but there are
Semillon.
others.
Yeah, there are Chardonnay. And this brings up a really good story, because our dear friend Pepe Tasca, last, gosh, was that this past summer? Was that this summer? Last summer.
It
Last
was.
summer.
It was last June.
Last June, when we went to dinner in Palermo, and he gave us one of his hot tips on how to know, kind of judge the seller of a restaurant, is to ask at the restaurant to bring you their oldest bottle of white wine. And it's because, white wines can age, but it's not that common that people do it. So if the restaurant is a really, at least they know their wine, let's say. But usually it's going to be a really nice restaurant. But knowing the wine and having that kind of a, that cellar lineup that you've
Yeah.
got 10, 20-year-old Chardonnays, that's impressive. And I think he just really enjoys an aged white wine. So
Yeah.
that is like that's his preference. And it really kind of opened my eyes to this whole idea, because yeah, you always do think, and I can't remember even what he ordered. Do you remember what that was? I have a
It
picture of it somewhere.
wasn't Sicilian. That's what I remember. What I remember is it wasn't Sicilian, and I'm really scared I'm going to say a gaff, but I think it might have been a Suave.
Oh, I think
Um,
you're right. I think you're right.
and it was the oldest one that the guy had, and he wasn't that old.
Okay, okay. So,
But
yeah, I mean, there are exceptions to different, white wines that you wouldn't think could age, but they can. It kind of, again, goes back to the way that they're made. If they start off as, I think the acidity is the key element in a white wine. It has to have a lot of acidity and
yeah,
alcohol too. So if you've got those qualities, and then you can give it 10 years, probably is more like a white wine. Maybe Chardonnay can be longer. But I did have this 20-year-old Sauvignon Blanc. I know that sounds crazy. I mean, even saying it sounds
it
crazy.
kind of does sound crazy.
It sounds crazy, But I did, and it was incredible. And I mean, I was at a table of wine journalists with, kind of expert winemakers talking about white wine, and one had brought a few bottles of one that she had made, years and years ago, or maybe she didn't make it, but they had previously made it, and she couldn't believe how well it had aged, like when she joined the winery. And so we were all tasting it and called it like, wow, this has a fourth dimension. It was, it's hard, like we both like love those really complex, beautifully delicate, but just so much going on kind of white wines. And that's not what you typically think with a white wine. You think of it just kind of like, as we call here in California, a porch pounder.
Yeah,
Have you ever heard that phrase?
I haven't, but that's
A porch pounder.
amazing.
Isn't it? It's just like, the wine that just like quaffable. And that's how we usually think about white wines. And these are thinkers. These were like Pinots, Pinot Noir, where you're just like, wow, I could just like think about everything that's going on in this wine. I just want to like enjoy these aromas. So it can be done. But we're talking about top winemakers making that level. So not to say that, you couldn't, but probably not. You're probably not going to get a Sauvignon Blanc at just any normal place and be able to age it. But you could with Riesling and Chardonnay and Chenin Blanc and
Yeah,
Sauvignon. So, well, great. I hope we've debunked some myths today.
absolutely. Thanks again, Lane. See you next time.
Thanks, Pia. See you soon.